The explosive device strapped to Marcus Rivera's chest had enough C4 to level half of Chicago General's emergency room. His finger hovered over the dead man's switch, while 23 terrified hostages cowered behind overturned gurneys. But Elena Vasquez, the 5'3" night nurse everyone called Scared Cat because she jumped at every loud noise, wasn't cowering. She was walking straight toward the bomber with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who had defused IEDs in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. "That's a military-grade device. You didn't build that yourself." 30 minutes later, when Delta Force helicopters landed on the hospital roof, the extraction team didn't ask for the bomb squad. They asked for one person. Where is Silent Storm? Hey everyone, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button. This story will blow your mind. Elena Vasquez had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being forgettable at Chicago General Hospital. At barely 5'3" and weighing maybe 115 pounds, she moved through the emergency department like a frightened mouse, always startling at sudden sounds, always apologizing for being in the way. The other staff had nicknamed her Scared Cat because she visibly flinched whenever ambulances arrived with sirens blaring, whenever trauma alerts echoed through the corridors, whenever anyone raised their voice even slightly. What none of them knew was that Elena's startle response wasn't fear. It was hypervigilance, a survival mechanism honed during 3 tours in Afghanistan as a member of the Army's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit. She had been Technical Sergeant Elena Vasquez, one of only 8 women certified to disarm improvised explosive devices in active combat zones. The woman they mocked for jumping at car doors slamming had once walked through minefields with steady hands and a calm heart. The transformation from elite bomb technician to timid civilian nurse had been deliberate and necessary. 2 years ago, Elena Vasquez had officially died in a classified operation near Kandahar, killed along with her EOD team when their convoy hit a sophisticated IED. In reality, she had been the sole survivor of an ambush that killed 5 of her teammates, and her survival had exposed a weapons trafficking operation that reached deep into American military command. Her death had been staged to protect her from retaliation while military investigators unraveled the corruption. She had been given a new identity, medical training to support her cover, and orders to disappear into civilian life until the investigation concluded. That had been 2 years ago, and Elena was beginning to wonder if she would ever be allowed to reclaim her real life. Every morning when she arrived at Chicago General for the night shift, Elena performed the same careful ritual of weakness. She would hunch her shoulders to hide the lean muscle beneath her scrubs, speak in whispers to disguise the command voice that had once directed bomb disposal operations, and force herself to flinch at sounds that wouldn't have fazed her in a war zone. "Vasquez, move it!" Dr. Patricia Hawthorne's sharp voice cut across the emergency department, causing several nurses to glance up from their work. Dr. Hawthorne was the night shift attending, a brilliant but abrasive woman who had never met a subordinate she couldn't find fault with. At 5'8", with steel-gray hair and the bearing of a drill sergeant, she ruled the night shift with an iron fist. Elena looked up from the supply cart she had been restocking, her dark eyes immediately dropping to avoid direct contact. "Yes, doctor. What do you need?" "What I need is for you to stop jumping every time an ambulance arrives," Dr. Hawthorne said, her voice carrying the edge of long-suppressed irritation. "This is an emergency room, Vasquez. Loud noises come with the territory. If you can't handle that basic reality, maybe you should consider transferring to pediatrics, where the worst trauma you'll see is scraped knees." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar shame of being called weak when every instinct in her body screamed that she was anything but. "I'm sorry, doctor. I'll try to do better." "Try?" Dr. Hawthorne stepped closer, using her height advantage to create a sense of intimidation. I don't want you to try, Vasquez. I want you to succeed. Do you understand the difference? Elena nodded mutely, forcing herself to maintain the submissive posture that had become second nature over the past 2 years. Around them, the other night shift staff pretended to be busy with their own tasks, but she could feel their eyes on her, could sense their mixture of pity and embarrassment at witnessing another public humiliation. Good, Dr. Hawthorne said, then glanced at her watch. It's 11:47 p.m. The overnight shift is officially starting, which means we need to be ready for whatever walks through those doors. Can you handle that responsibility, or do I need to find someone more reliable? Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In Afghanistan, she had been responsible for clearing routes that kept entire convoys safe from roadside bombs. She had defused devices that could have killed dozens of soldiers, working under fire with hands that never trembled. But here in the civilian world, she was treated like a liability because she couldn't turn off the survival instincts that had kept her alive in a war zone. I can handle it, Doctor, she said quietly. I hope so, Dr. Hawthorne replied, then turned to address the assembled staff. All right, everyone, listen up. We've got reports of increased gang activity in the downtown area tonight. Police are expecting potential casualties from drug-related violence. I want Trauma Bay 1 prepped and ready, extra blood products standing by, and security on high alert. As if summoned by her words, the familiar wail of an approaching ambulance began to echo in the distance. Elena's body tensed involuntarily, not from fear, but from the automatic threat assessment that her training had burned into her nervous system. Her ears cataloged the sound. Single vehicle, high speed, emergency lights activated. Standard medical transport, not a tactical insertion or potential vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. But to everyone watching, her momentary tension looked like the fearful flinching of a nurse who couldn't handle the stress of emergency medicine. Perfect, Dr. Hawthorne muttered under her breath, loud enough for Elena to hear. Right on cue. The ambulance bay doors burst open and paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney carrying a young man covered in blood. Male, approximately 25, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen, the lead paramedic called out. Lost vitals twice en route. We got him back, but he's critical. Bay 1, Dr. Hawthorne ordered, falling into step beside the gurney. Vasquez, get me 2 units of O-negative and prep the rapid infuser. Can you manage that without having a panic attack? Elena bit back the response that wanted to escape, that she had treated similar wounds in field hospitals while mortar rounds exploded overhead, and simply nodded. Yes, doctor. As the trauma team worked to stabilize the gunshot victim, Elena found herself automatically assessing the tactical situation. The patient's wounds were consistent with close-range, small arms fire, probably from a 9mm handgun, based on the entry patterns. Gang-related violence, as Dr. Hawthorne had predicted, which meant there might be retaliation, counter-violence, additional casualties coming in throughout the night. Her assessment was interrupted by a commotion at the emergency department entrance. A man had entered through the automatic doors, moving with the careful, measured steps of someone trying very hard not to draw attention to themselves. But Elena's trained eye immediately picked up the warning signs. Bulky clothing inappropriate for the warm autumn weather. Rigid posture suggesting something strapped to his torso. Hands held carefully away from his body. Dr. Hawthorne, Elena said quietly, not taking her eyes off the new arrival. Not now, Vasquez. I'm trying to save this kid's life. Doctor, I think we have a problem. The only problem I have is a nurse who can't focus on her job, Dr. Hawthorne snapped, then glanced up to see what had captured Elena's attention. The man at the entrance had stopped moving. He was approximately 30 years old, Hispanic, wearing a heavy winter coat despite the 75-degree temperature outside. His eyes were scanning the emergency department with the systematic precision of someone conducting reconnaissance. When his gaze met Elena's, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who had already accepted that he was going to die tonight. "Everyone stay calm," the man said, his voice carrying clearly across the department. His words were measured, controlled, but Elena could hear the slight tremor that suggested he was fighting to maintain composure. "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I need you all to listen very carefully." Dr. Hawthorne straightened up from the gurney, her face pale as she recognized the tone of someone making demands backed by the threat of violence. "Sir, this is a hospital. If you're injured, we can help you, but you need to—" "I said stay calm," the man repeated, and now Elena could see his right hand moving toward the zipper of his coat. "My name is Marcus Rivera. My daughter was brought here 3 weeks ago. Car accident. You people let her die." Elena's mind was racing, cataloging details with the systematic precision her EOD training had ingrained in her. Rivera's movement patterns, his speech cadence, the way he held his left arm slightly away from his body, all consistent with someone wearing a suicide vest. The bulge beneath his coat was too regular to be body fat, too rigid to be normal clothing. "Sir," Dr. Hawthorne said, raising her hands in a calming gesture. "I remember your daughter, Carmen Rivera, age 16. We did everything we could." "You did nothing." Rivera's composure cracked for a moment, revealing the raw grief underneath. "She laid in Trauma Bay 2 for 4 hours while you people ignored her. 4 hours! She died alone because you couldn't be bothered to care about one more dead Mexican girl." Elena felt her heart sink. She remembered Carmen Rivera, a beautiful teenager who had been brought in after a high-speed collision, massive internal injuries, multiple system failures. The trauma team had worked for hours trying to save her, but some injuries were simply too severe for any medical intervention to overcome. But to a grieving father, it would have looked like negligence, like racism, like a system that valued some lives more than others. "Mr. Rivera," Dr. Hawthorne said gently, "I was the attending physician when Carmen was brought in. We worked for 6 hours trying to save her. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, 6 hours of nothing!" Rivera's hand was on his zipper now. "I watched through that window. I saw you people standing around talking while my baby died. You gave up on her because she was nobody to you." Around the emergency department, staff and patients were beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong. Nurses were backing away from the central area. Patients in the waiting room were standing up nervously. And the security guard on duty, an elderly man named Frank, who was more equipped to handle drunk patients than genuine threats, was reaching for his radio with shaking hands. "Everyone stay where you are," Rivera said, his voice rising slightly. "Nobody leaves. Nobody calls for help. If I see anyone trying to be a hero, everyone dies." He unzipped his coat. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Strapped to Marcus Rivera's chest was a sophisticated explosive device, not the crude pipe bomb or fertilizer explosive that she might have expected from a grieving civilian. This was military-grade equipment, blocks of C4 plastic explosive wired to what looked like a cell phone detonator, with additional components that suggested anti-tamper mechanisms. This wasn't something an untrained person could have built in their garage. Someone with serious technical knowledge had constructed this device, and they had built it to kill as many people as possible in a confined space. "Dear God," Dr. Hawthorne whispered, and Elena could hear the fear creeping into her voice. 23 people in this department right now," Rivera said, his hand now hovering over what Elena recognized as a dead man's switch. 23 people who are going to know what it feels like to watch someone die and not be able to do anything about it. The emergency department erupted in chaos. Patients screamed and tried to flee toward the exits, but Rivera raised his left hand, revealing the dead man's switch. A simple pressure mechanism that would detonate the explosive if he released it or if his hand was injured. "I said nobody moves!" Rivera shouted. "This device is connected to my heartbeat and this switch. If I die, if I get shot, if I let go of this button, everyone in this room dies with me." Frank, the security guard, was speaking urgently into his radio. "Code Silver, Emergency Department. We have a bomb threat. Repeat, bomb threat. Request immediate backup and evacuation protocol." "Turn that off!" Rivera screamed at him. "No police, no backup, no evacuation. We're going to sit here together and have a conversation about justice." Elena found herself moving without conscious decision, not away from Rivera like everyone else, but toward him. Her movement was slow, deliberate, non-threatening. The same approach she had used when dealing with unstable explosive devices in combat zones. "Vasquez, what are you doing?" Dr. Hawthorne hissed. "Get back here." But Elena wasn't listening to Dr. Hawthorne anymore. She was listening to training that had been burned into her muscle memory through repetition and life-or-death experience. When faced with an explosive threat, you had three options: evacuate the area, call for bomb disposal experts, or attempt to neutralize the device yourself. The first two options weren't available, which left only the third. "Mr. Rivera," Elena said, her voice carrying a calm authority that made several staff members turn to look at her in surprise. This wasn't the whispered, apologetic tone they were used to hearing from Scared Cat. This was the voice of someone accustomed to talking people through crisis situations. "Stay back," Rivera warned, but Elena could hear uncertainty in his voice. He had expected panic, screaming, chaos. He hadn't expected calm, controlled opposition. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elena said, taking another careful step forward. "I just want to talk. You said Carmen was your daughter?" "Don't you dare say her name," Rivera said, but some of the rage was leaving his voice, replaced by the raw grief that was really driving his actions. "She was beautiful," Elena said simply. "I remember her. Brown hair, bright smile in the photo you showed us. 16 years old, honor student, wanted to be a doctor." Rivera's composure cracked slightly. "You remember her?" "I remember all of them," Elena said, which was true. In her 2 years at Chicago General, she had seen dozens of trauma victims, and she remembered every face, every story, every family member who had stood where Marcus Rivera was standing now. Carmen was special. You could see it in her eyes even when she was unconscious. She was a fighter. "She died because of them," Rivera said, gesturing toward Dr. Hawthorne and the rest of the medical staff with his free hand. "They didn't care enough to save her." Elena was close enough now to get a better look at the explosive device. Her assessment had been correct. This was definitely military-grade equipment, and whoever had built it knew exactly what they were doing. The C4 was arranged in a shape charge configuration, designed to maximize casualty radius in a confined space. The detonator was a dual-system setup, with both the dead man's switch and what looked like a timer backup. But there was something else that caught her attention. The wire configuration was too complex for a simple suicide bomb. This device had been designed by someone with advanced EOD knowledge, someone who understood not just how to build explosive devices, but how bomb disposal experts would try to defeat them. "Mr. Rivera," Elena said carefully, "where did you get this device?" Rivera's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. "What?" "This bomb. You didn't build this yourself. Someone with military training put this together. Someone who wanted to make sure it couldn't be easily disarmed." "I don't know what you're talking about," Rivera said, but Elena could hear the lie in his voice. "Yes, you do," Elena said gently. Someone approached you. Someone who knew you were angry about Carmen's death. They offered to help you get justice, didn't they? They built this device and told you exactly how to use it. Rivera's hand was trembling now, and Elena could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the emergency department. They said the hospital needed to pay for what they did, that the only way to make them understand was to make them feel what I felt. Elena nodded as if this made perfect sense. And they were right about one thing. The system failed Carmen. But Mr. Rivera, the people in this room tonight, most of them weren't even here 3 weeks ago. You're about to kill innocent people who never had a chance to help your daughter. It doesn't matter, Rivera said, but his voice lacked conviction. Someone has to pay. Someone does, Elena agreed. But not these people. And not you. Carmen wouldn't want this, would she? She wanted to be a doctor, to help people, to save lives. What would she think if she knew her death was being used as an excuse to kill other people? Rivera's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked less like a terrorist and more like a broken father who had lost everything that mattered to him. I miss her so much, he whispered. Elena was close enough now to reach out and touch the device if she wanted to. Instead, she kept her hands visible and non-threatening. I know you do. And I know the people who convinced you to do this. They promised it would make the pain stop. But it won't. Killing innocent people won't bring Carmen back. Then what will? Rivera asked, and the desperation in his voice was heartbreaking. Nothing will bring her back, Elena said honestly. But you can make sure her death means something. You can fight to change the system that failed her, make sure other families don't go through what you've been through. But not like this. Rivera was wavering. Elena could see it in his posture, in the way his grip on the dead man's switch was loosening slightly. But she also knew that suicide bombers in crisis often experienced moments of doubt followed by renewed determination. She needed to act quickly before his resolve returned. Mr. Rivera, she said, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take 3 deep breaths and think about Carmen. Not about the anger, not about the pain, just about her. About who she was, what she loved, what she wanted to become. Rivera closed his eyes and did as she asked. Elena used those precious seconds to study the bomb more closely, identifying the primary detonation mechanism, the backup systems, the anti-tamper devices that would trigger an explosion if someone tried to disarm it incorrectly. When Rivera opened his eyes, Elena was ready. The people who built this device, they don't care about Carmen. They don't care about you. They're using your grief to accomplish something that has nothing to do with justice for your daughter. What are you talking about? Rivera asked. This bomb was designed to kill as many first responders as possible, Elena said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she had used when briefing military commanders. When it goes off, it's going to bring every police officer, every paramedic, every firefighter in the city to this location. And then there will be a second device, somewhere nearby, designed to kill them when they arrive. Rivera's eyes widened. No, that's not. They said it was just about the hospital. Mr. Rivera, I've seen devices like this before. This is a terrorist attack designed to maximize casualties and create fear throughout the city. Carmen's death was just the excuse they needed to convince you to be their weapon. Elena could see understanding dawning in Rivera's eyes, followed by horror as he realized how completely he had been manipulated. Oh my God, what have I done? Nothing that can't be undone, Elena said quickly. But we need to act fast. How long until the backup timer triggers? Rivera looked down at the device with new eyes, seeing it now not as an instrument of justice, but as a weapon of mass destruction. 15 minutes, he whispered. They said it would give me time to explain why I was doing it, and then it would go off, whether you wanted it to or not, Elena finished. Mr. Rivera, I need you to trust me. I can disarm this device, but I need you to stay very still and do exactly what I tell you. You're just a nurse, Rivera said, confusion mixing with hope in his voice. Elena looked him directly in the eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she let her mask drop completely. The frightened, apologetic woman who jumped at loud noises was gone, replaced by the confident, competent bomb disposal expert who had saved countless lives in Afghanistan. No, she said simply, I'm not. The change in Elena's demeanor was so complete that Dr. Hawthorne actually took a step backward in surprise. The woman who had been cowering behind the nurse's station moments before was now standing with military bearing, her hands steady, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from real command experience. Everyone listen carefully, Elena said, not raising her voice but somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the emergency department. We have 14 minutes to clear this building and disarm this device. I need all patients and non-essential staff to evacuate immediately through the south exit. Medical staff, I need you to begin emergency evacuation of patients who can't move themselves. Vasquez, what are you doing? Dr. Hawthorne demanded. We need to wait for the bomb squad. There isn't time, Elena cut her off. And I am the bomb squad. She turned back to Rivera, who was staring at her with a mixture of confusion and growing hope. Mr. Rivera, I'm going to need you to be very brave for the next few minutes. Can you do that for Carmen? Rivera nodded mutely. Elena began her approach, moving with the careful precision of someone who had performed this procedure dozens of times under combat conditions. Her hands were steady as she examined the device, identifying each component, mapping the circuit pathways that would lead to detonation. This is a sophisticated dual trigger system, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone listening. Primary detonation via dead man's switch, secondary timer backup, anti-tamper mechanisms on both the power source and the explosive package. Can you stop it? Rivera asked. Yes, Elena said with absolute confidence, but I need you to maintain pressure on that switch no matter what happens. If you let go, if your hand cramps, if you get startled, everyone in this building dies. Do you understand? I understand. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small multi-tool that she had carried every day for 2 years, hidden among the typical contents of a nurse's pocket. To casual observation, it looked like a standard medical instrument, but it had been specially modified with the tools she would need for emergency EOD work. Dr. Hawthorne, Elena called without looking up from the bomb. I need you to continue the evacuation, but keep a small team ready to treat casualties if this goes wrong. And get someone to call this number. She rattled off a series of digits that Dr. Hawthorne didn't recognize. Tell them Silent Storm needs immediate extraction. Silent Storm? Dr. Hawthorne repeated blankly. Just make the call, Elena said, her attention focused entirely on the device strapped to Rivera's chest. She had identified the primary circuit pathway and located the anti-tamper switches that would need to be disabled before she could attempt to cut the main power feed. Working with movements so small and precise they were almost invisible, Elena began to disable the bomb's defensive mechanisms. Each wire she touched, each component she adjusted, brought them either one step closer to safety or one step closer to a detonation that would level half the emergency department. How did you learn to do this? Rivera asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Afghanistan, Elena said simply, not elaborating. 3 tours. I've disarmed more of these than I care to count. Are you going to make it? Elena paused in her work to look up at him. Mr. Rivera, I made a promise to Carmen when she died. I promised I would make sure no other families went through what you've been going through. I don't intend to break that promise tonight." It was a lie. She had never made such a promise. But it was a lie that gave Rivera something to hold on to besides his anger and grief. She could see him straightening slightly, finding reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed. 5 minutes, Elena announced, glancing at the timer display on the device. She had successfully disabled 2 of the 3 anti-tamper mechanisms, but the third one was proving more complex than she had anticipated. Behind her, she could hear the organized chaos of a hospital evacuation in progress. Patients were being moved out of the emergency department, staff were grabbing essential equipment, and Dr. Hawthorne was speaking urgently into a phone, repeating the number Elena had given her. Elena found herself falling into the familiar rhythm of bomb disposal work, the careful analysis of circuits and components, the methodical process of elimination, the absolute focus required to work with devices designed to kill anyone who tried to interfere with them. It was strangely calming, a return to work that had once defined her entire identity. 3 minutes, she announced, her hands now working on the main detonator assembly. She had isolated the power source and identified the primary trigger mechanism, but the backup timer was proving more stubborn than expected. "Elena," Rivera said quietly, "if this doesn't work—" "It's going to work," Elena said firmly. "But if it doesn't, I want you to know that you gave me something I didn't expect to find tonight. You gave me hope that Carmen's death might still mean something." Elena's hands never stopped moving, but she felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with the explosive device. This was why she had joined the military, why she had spent years risking her life to disarm bombs, not for abstract concepts like freedom or democracy, but for moments like this, when her skills could save innocent people from senseless violence. 2 minutes, she said, and now she was working on the final circuit, the one that connected the timer to the detonation mechanism. It was a simple connection in theory, but the device's creator had hidden it behind multiple decoy wires and false pathways. "I need you to stay very still now," Elena told Rivera. "I'm about to cut the primary power feed, and if I'm wrong about the circuit pathway, the motion detector will trigger immediately." Rivera closed his eyes and held his breath. Elena made the cut. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nothing happened. The timer display continued its countdown. 0123, 0122, 0121. Then Elena smiled. "Got it," she said, reaching for a second wire. "The timer is still running, but it's no longer connected to the detonator. Mr. Rivera, I need you to very slowly release pressure on the dead man's switch." "Are you sure?" Rivera asked. "I'm sure," Elena said. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Rivera released the switch. The timer continued its countdown, but the device remained inert. Elena had successfully isolated the explosive package from all trigger mechanisms. The emergency department erupted in cheers and applause, but Elena barely heard them. She was focused entirely on the final step, removing the explosive vest from Rivera's body without triggering any hidden mechanisms she might have missed. "Mr. Rivera, I need you to raise your arms very slowly," she instructed. "I'm going to lift this vest over your head, and then we're both going to walk very carefully away from it." The vest came off without incident, and Elena immediately carried it to the far corner of the emergency department, where she placed it behind a heavy equipment cabinet that would provide some protection if anything went wrong. Only then did she allow herself to feel the relief that came with a successful bomb disposal. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that always followed operations like this. "Elena!" Dr. Hawthorne was at her side, her face pale, but filled with something that looked like awe. How did you? Who are you? Before Elena could answer, the familiar sound of helicopter rotors began to echo outside the hospital. But these weren't medical helicopters. These were military aircraft, multiple birds flying in tight formation. Elena closed her eyes, knowing that her 2 years of hiding were officially over. The emergency department's automatic doors were forced open, and tactical operators in full combat gear poured into the building. They moved with the fluid precision of elite soldiers, weapons at the ready, scanning for threats with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. The lead operator, a tall man with sergeant stripes and the weathered face of someone who had seen too many war zones, spotted Elena immediately and approached her with his weapon lowered. "Silent Storm?" he asked. Elena straightened to attention, muscle memory overriding 2 years of practiced civilian behavior. "Present." "Ma'am, we're here to extract you. Colonel Martinez is waiting on the bird." "Extract me?" Elena glanced around the emergency department, at the colleagues who were staring at her with mixtures of confusion and amazement. "I'm not going anywhere. I have a job here." The sergeant's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, with respect, your cover was blown the moment you disarmed that device. The people who built it are going to know their operation failed, and they're going to know who stopped it. You're not safe here anymore." Elena felt a crushing weight settle on her shoulders. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it to arrive in the middle of a crisis that had forced her to reveal her true skills. "What about Mr. Rivera?" she asked, looking at Marcus Rivera, who was sitting on a gurney being examined by Dr. Hawthorne. "Mr. Rivera is going to be fine," the sergeant assured her. "He's going to help us identify the people who recruited him for this operation. His cooperation is going to save a lot of lives." Elena nodded, then turned to Dr. Hawthorne. "Patricia, I need you to know that everything I did here tonight, I did as Elena Vasquez, nurse, not as whoever I used to be." Dr. Hawthorne was staring at her with something approaching wonder. The woman who jumped every time an ambulance arrived just disarmed a military-grade explosive device. How is that possible? "Sometimes the people we think are weakest are actually the strongest," Elena said simply. "They're just carrying weights we can't see." She looked around the emergency department one last time, taking in the faces of the people she had worked alongside for 2 years. They would probably never understand the full truth of what had happened tonight, but that was okay. Some truths were too dangerous to share. "Silent Storm," the sergeant said gently. "We need to go." Elena Vasquez, also known as Technical Sergeant Vasquez, also known as Silent Storm, took one last look at the civilian life she was leaving behind, then walked toward the waiting helicopters. Outside, the night air was filled with the sound of rotor blades and the organized chaos of a military extraction operation. As Elena climbed into the lead aircraft, she could see news vans arriving at the hospital, drawn by reports of a bomb threat and the unusual sight of military helicopters in downtown Chicago. By morning, the official story would be that a disturbed individual had threatened the hospital with a fake explosive device, and that he had been talked down by hospital staff. The role of a former bomb disposal expert working undercover as a nurse would never be mentioned in any report. But in the emergency department of Chicago General, the legend of Scared Cat, the nurse who had walked straight into danger without hesitation, would live on long after Elena herself had disappeared back into whatever shadows the military required. The mouse had always been a lion. She'd just been very good at wearing the disguise.